Dear students, welcome to today's class. Now in this class, we are going to continue our discussion on the chapter of performance management and appraisal, which is again chapter 9 from your book. So if you remember from the last class that we were discussing about the different performance appraisal techniques. So here again, we are going to continue our discussion with that topic. Now in this video, I'm going to discuss two further performance appraisal techniques. So the first one of them is electronic performance monitoring. And I'm 100% sure as soon as you heard that name, you more or less understood what happens in this method. So let's dive deep into this definition. So what happens under this method? So electronic performance monitoring means having supervisors electronically monitor the amount of work an employee is doing per day and thereby measure their performance. So it is basically electronically monitoring an employee's performance throughout the day. Now, can you think of any practical example that you know of? Like where does this electronic performance monitoring takes place? Let me give you an example here. All of you know this example. So without further delay, let's move on to the example. Now say you are really hungry, right? So you want to have some really good food, maybe burger or chicken or something like that. And when we are hungry, most of the time the first thing that we go through is our mobile phone where we search for Food Panda or Pathao, right? So yes, you guessed it right. In the case of the delivery people working in Foodpanda and Uber, their performance monitoring takes place electronically. How? It's in this manner. So whenever they use their app or they are logged into their app, the head office of Uber and Pathao, they can actually see where they are going, how many trips they have given for the whole day, what is the amount of fare they have collected, and finally, the most important one, is basically they can go to the review that they have received from the customers. So in summary, the people from the head office can monitor their performance electronically through the mobile phone all throughout the day. So that is what happens in electronic performance monitoring. Now, where else does this electronic performance monitoring takes place? This is another very common example. So in the case of call center people. So whenever you are working in a call center, your performance is being monitored throughout the day. So how many calls have you received? How many hours have you spoken on the phone? What was the customer's feedback about your tone, about your voice, and about your service over the phone? So again, this is another very common example of electronic performance monitoring. So I guess now you understand what happens in this method. So now let's move on to the next method. Now as you can see here, the name of the next method is critical incident method. The details of this appraisal method is hidden in the name. Critical incident. So under this method, we are going to identify the critical or important incidents. That's it. Don't worry, it will be very clear to you what we mean by critical incidents. So let's move on to the definition first. Here it goes. Now please read this definition very carefully. If you understand the meaning of this definition, the whole process will be crystal clear to you. So let's start. Identifying and recording an employee's best and worst performance and oftentimes very critical or important performance over a time period for each target or task or duties. So the main portions of this definition are marked in blue. So we are going to record the best and worst and the critical or important performances. So the HR manager basically records all the important or critical performances of an employee throughout the year. That's what happens in this method. So the best, worst, and important examples here are called critical incidents. So once the HR manager records all the important or critical performances of an employee, what happens next? This is what happens. These recorded critical incidents are discussed with the employee to encourage positive critical incidents and correct negative critical incidents. It is as simple as that. So once the critical incidents or important performances are recorded, then at the end of the year, the HR manager sits down with the employee and discusses those performances. So it is a positive or the best performance, then the HR manager encourages that employee. On the other hand, if that is a poor performance or the worst performance, then the HR manager discusses ways of improvement. So in summary, in this method, an HR manager records all the important performances or the critical performances of an employee over the year, and at the end of the year, the HR manager sits with the employee and discusses all the recorded performances. So if it is a very good performance, the employee is encouraged. On the other hand, if it is poor performance, a discussion takes place with the employee where scopes of improvement and ways of improvement are discussed. Don't worry if it is not clear to you yet. Let me give you an example. So what can be an example of a best performance? Here it is. So maybe an employee generated $25,000 extra sales in a given month. So whatever the target of the employee was, the employee not only met that target, but also sold $25,000 extra. So that is a very positive important incident or positive critical incident, right? So if the HR manager followed critical incident method, then obviously the HR manager should record this performance, and at the end of the year, when discussing with the employee, the HR manager must encourage that person and praise that person for such a very good performance. Now, what can be an example of a worst performance? Here it is. So for this example, let's assume I was the employee, right? So my worst performance was damaged a 2 lakh taka machine, resulting in lost production for himself and for the entire assembly line. So no one could use that machine any further. So this is a very negative critical incident or negative performance. So again, under this method, maybe the HR manager had recorded this performance, and at the end of the year, the HR manager sat down with me and then discussed ways of improvement so that this kind of activities does not happen in the future. So this is what happens exactly under critical incident method. We are going to record and discuss all the critical incidents throughout the year. Now, before we finish this concept, let's take a look at this definition even in further detail. So we record this best and worst performance and other important performance of an employee over the time period, but this performance recording takes place for each target or task of that employee. Again, for each target or task or duties of an employee, we record the best and the worst performance over a time period. Now let me give you a more practical example. In that way, it will be clearer to you. So here is one practical example. So on the left hand side here, we have all the duties of an employee. In the next column, we have the targets of each of these duties. And finally, in the last column, we have recorded all the important incidents in each of these duties performed by the employee. Let me explain one of these duties, and I guess in that way, we'll be able to understand the whole table. Now, rather than going through all of these duties, let me explain just the last one. If you understand this one, you will be able to understand these two as well. So the last duty of the employee was supervise machinery maintenance. So as an employee, this is one of your duties. You have to supervise the maintenance of the machinery. Now your target as a supervisor was no shutdown due to faulty machinery. So as a supervisor of this machinery maintenance, you have to ensure that no shutdowns take place. So the machinery does not stop abruptly. So that's my target. Now let's say you or the employee has carried out his duties throughout the year, and at the same time, the HR manager or the line manager of this person has observed performance throughout the year and recorded this critical incident. Let's read it. Instituted new preventive maintenance system for plant and prevented a machine breakdown by discovering faulty part. Now, as you can see here, this is a really positive point, right? So while performing the regular duties, the employee has done a very important positive activity. What is that important activity? That person prevented a machine breakdown by discovering a faulty part. And at the same time, the person also came up something really new, right? So maybe that new system was really revolutionary for the organization. So that's why it is a critical or important incident. So the HR manager or the line manager has recorded it. And finally, maybe at the end of the year, the manager is going to sit with the employee and provide a really positive feedback or praise to that employee. So this is exactly how a critical incident method is carried out. Against each duty, we record the best, worst, or very important or critical performances done by the employee throughout the year. So I guess by now everyone understands what happens in a critical incident method. Now, before we finish off, let's take a look at some of the positive sides or strengths of using critical incident method. And finally, we are going to finish off by discussing some of the negative sides of using critical incident method. So here is one of the strengths of using critical incident method. Good and bad examples, both are highlighted. So through this method, an employee can get to know both their positive and negative performances. So the best and worst performances. And in that manner, the employee knows what the correct course of action is to fix the problem in the future. So that is one major positive point. What is the other one? The supervisor has to monitor the employee's performance throughout the year. So evaluation and appraisal is more consistent, fair, and precise. So yes, that is very easily understandable. Because in this method, the employee's performance is being monitored throughout the year. Why? So that the HR manager or the line manager can record all the positive or negative or best or worst performances throughout the year. And when we observe someone throughout the year, the evaluation is obviously more fair and precise. So these are the two strengths. Now what are some of the weaknesses of this method? Here it goes. No numerical rating, only real life examples. Now if you remember, in graphic rating scale, we scored an employee's performance on different characteristics from 1 to 5, right? So we gave specific scores to specific people. But in critical incident method, we did not give any score to any characteristic. So that is sometimes a problem. Because when we have specific numbers, it is really easy to compare performances among employees. So without numbers, it is hard to compare between employees, and also since numerical evaluation is not possible, it is difficult to use to make salary or payment based decisions. So again, in graphic rating scale, we gave numbers to specific employees, but in this method, we do not provide any specific numbers. So we do not quantify the performance, and that can be a shortcoming sometimes. So yes, we are done with these two methods. Thank you for listening to this lecture. In the next lecture, I'm going to talk about the last performance appraisal technique of this chapter. See you very soon.